No.
Okay.
Can you restart the timer? Then do I go whenever? One of the questions I've heard the most in America was, are you Japanese? Today, I would like to tell you why this might not be a very good question, especially if it's to a Korean person. Korea and Japan are two neighboring East Asian countries that have been in an eternal cycle of antagonism with territorial conflicts, with trade war, and the history of Japanese colonization over Korea. But among all these conflicts, the center of heated debate has been the comfort women issue, a forgotten war history. In this presentation, I would like to talk to you about who these comfort women were, statistics related to them, the Japanese perspective of it, and the Korean perspective of it. So we will begin by describing who these comfort women were. The Oxford University Press defines comfort woman as a woman or a girl forced to engage in sexual activity with Japanese soldiers as part of the system of brothels operated by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. In more direct terms, a comfort woman is defined as a sex slave. According to the Digital Museum of Comfort Women, most of these girls were in their teenagers, from 12 to 19 or even younger. They were kidnapped or enticed by false job offers to be brought to foreign countries and serve as sex slaves in a completely foreign world. And they served in so-called comfort stations as shown in the picture on the right, where these women were kept in a systematic way. Now that we've briefly discussed who these comfort women were, I would like to move on to discuss the statistics related to them. There were roughly about 100,000 to 200,000 comfort women, and the majority of them were from Korea. And there were about 2,000 comfort stations that were in Manchuria, Burma, and other Asian regions. But because most of these comfort women were from Korea, but all of these comfort stations were outside of Korea, all the comfort women from Korea were brought away from their families and were forced into sex slavery in a completely foreign world. To better understand their experiences, I believe it's important to listen to one of the comfort women. So here's a video from CNN.
This is her war story. The capture. She was 14.
One grabbed me by my legs, and one grabbed me by my arms, and they threw me into the back of the truck. I flew high and landed hard. There were about 5 women sitting there.
Then forced labor. Routine beatings. And when Yeok-sun later arrives at his so-called wartime comfort station, relentless rape.
They would use guns and swords to threaten us. They would shoot and they would cut. How is this a comfort station? It was an execution ground.
40 or 50 Japanese soldiers a day for some women, she says. They're girls, really. By the time this photo is taken of Yi at 21, she's been missing from her home in Korea for so long her own government has declared her dead. This wedding never happened. The graduation didn't either. They're just photos she took. They're symbols of what might have been. A life taken from one of the so-called comfort women, forced into sex slavery by the Japanese military during the Second World War. There are estimates there may have been as many as 200,000 of them. Today, there are about a dozen.
So as he describes it, the experiences of the comfort women were incredibly brutal. They lost their families, they lost their homes, their bodies, and their identities because they were forced to use Japanese names and speak in Japanese even though they didn't know how to. The question is, why is this issue from back in World War II still unresolved and still a center of heated debate between the two countries? Let's take a look at the public survey by Gender and NPO, which shows the public opinion of the Japanese and the South Koreans. While in both countries, a substantial proportion of people believe that the issue is not really resolved, as shown in the gray sections, the problem is that 20% of Japanese are unsure about the issue, which means that they are not aware of what happened in the conflict, and 10% of them believe that it is completely resolved. On the other hand, 35% of Koreans believe that it is completely unresolved. So with these very distinct perspectives, I believe it is important to look at both sides of the issue. So starting from the Japanese perspective, The Japan Times says that the Japanese claim comfort women were prostitutes who voluntarily served in prostitution with their own will. They also claim that the statistics related to comfort women are often inaccurate and very exaggerated. They further go on to describe that it is unfair to single out only Japan when other countries also committed such practices during wartime. Their last argument is that Korea is trying to provoke and damage the diplomatic relationship between Korea and Japan using an event from the past that doesn't matter anymore. The Korean perspective of the issue is drastically different. Koreans claim that the Japanese actions were a clear violation of the international law, and this is based on the Berkeley Journal of International Law that states that in addition to the restriction of victims' freedom of movement, it forced them to perform sexual labor. Thus, it constituted a system of slavery that violated the international law. The Koreans further believe that the girls were kidnapped or offered false job offers instead of voluntarily serving in prostitution. They also explain their main argument is that there were no apologies made directly to the victims and there were no rightful and just compensations made for them. And they claim that the statistics of the Japanese claim are inaccurate because the Japanese tried to hide this practice from the outside world. With such prevalent perspective, public sentiments in Korea developed into mass protests in the streets. There have been gatherings in front of the Japanese embassy, as you can see here, in Seoul every Wednesday for the last 25 years, which according to Al Jazeera is the world's longest protest. And with just 20 survivors remaining now, and most of them in their 90s, it is clear that Japan and Korea must both work together to make a true compromise for this issue that makes rightful and sincere compensations for the victims of the war crime. It is time to bring comfort for the